For decades, the standard explanation for why Maya cities emptied out was drought. Simple, well-documented, more or less settled. Then a team drilled into a lakebed in Guatemala and found a city whose climate record shows nothing unusual at all. Steady rain the whole time. The people who lived there disappeared anyway, on almost the same timeline as everyone else in the region. A University of Montreal team published that finding, and it changes the story in a real way. Drought turns out to only be part of what happened, and the rest of it reaches into political history, economics, and genetics all at once. By the end of this video, you'll see a prince who switched sides in a war between two Maya superpowers and sacked his own brother's city, a theory about why complex societies collapse under their own weight, and DNA evidence that changes what collapse even meant for the people who lived through it. Between roughly 750 and 900 CE, dozens of Maya cities across some 60,000 square miles were abandoned within a few generations. Tikal alone had held an estimated 120,000 people at its peak. After this period, its rulers stopped commissioning new monuments, and the tradition of carving royal history into stone, which had run for centuries, thinned out and eventually stopped at site after site. Drought became the accepted explanation because the evidence for it was strong. Cave and lake records across the Yucatan Peninsula show repeated, severe dry spells that line up closely with when specific cities were abandoned. Maya agriculture ran on seasonal rain, and Maya kings built part of their legitimacy on a claimed relationship with Chak, the rain god. So when the rain failed for years at a stretch, both the food supply and the political system resting on top of it were exposed at the same time. Colonial-era chronicles, written later in Yucatan Mayan, even describe what happened next as a great descent and a lesser descent, waves of people leaving the southern lowlands for the north. For a long time, that was simply the story people told about the Maya collapse. That's the theory Benjamin Gwyneth set out to test. Gwyneth, a geography professor at the Université de Montréal, has spent years studying the environment around Laguna Itizan, a lake in the southwestern Maya lowlands. His team pulled sediment cores reaching back 3,300 years. Inside the mud were three overlapping signals, each one a different kind of evidence preserved in the same layers of sediment. Soot that spikes when land gets cleared by fire, plant wax compounds that reflect how much rain fell and what was growing at the time, and residue that rises and falls with the size of the population living nearby. Read together year by year, those three signals let the team separate climate, farming activity, and population into three parallel timelines instead of guessing at all three from one blurry record. What the climate signal showed didn't match what the drought theory predicted. No drying trend across the whole record, and no spike in land clearing that would suggest desperate farming on marginal land. The rain kept arriving on schedule, likely orographic rainfall, pushed up over the nearby mountains as moist air off the Caribbean rose and cooled. The population signal told a different story. It dropped on close to the same timeline as the cities that really were drying out at the time. A site with an intact climate record lost its people almost as fast as one going through genuine drought. If drought alone accounts for the classic collapse, Itsan is the kind of place that should have survived. Instead, it emptied out along with everyone else. So if drought didn't kill Itsan, what did? Gwyneth's answer points to something bigger than one lake. Maya cities weren't self-contained the way the drought theory assumes. They were bound into a single political and economic system, and few stories make that system as visible as what happened at a smaller city called Dos Pilas. Around 629 CE, Tikal founded Dos Pilas as a military outpost built specifically to control trade along the Pasión River, the route that carried jade, obsidian, quetzal feathers, and shells from the Caribbean into the lowlands. Tikal's king installed his own son, a prince named Balaj Chan Kawil, as its ruler. Around 650 CE, Calakmul attacked and defeated Dos Pilas. The prince didn't die and didn't disappear. He switched allegiance to Calakmul, spent years rebuilding his position inside the Snake Kingdom's alliance network, and eventually led an army against his own brother, the reigning king of Tikal. Sacking the capital, his own family ruled, and delivering him to Dos Pilas to be sacrificed. A trade outpost, run by a member of the royal family, went to war against the capital that built it. That's what networked meant in practice. Cities, dynasties, and trade routes were tangled together closely enough that a personal betrayal between two brothers could realign an entire regional alliance system. Tikal itself went silent for roughly 130 years after its defeats in this stretch of wars, a gap that shows up directly in the stone record. The city simply stopped carving anything worth remembering, because for a century and a third, there wasn't a victory to record. Balaj Chand Kawil lived out the rest of his life as a loyal vassal of Calakmul, attending the coronation of its next Snake King a few years before his own death around 692 CE. Tikal's revenge came 3 years later in 695 CE, when a king remembered as Joseph Tainter finally defeated Calakmul and ended its regional dominance. By then, the war the two cities had started had run for more than a century, and it had pulled outposts, vassal kingdoms, and river trade routes across the entire southern lowlands into one continuous conflict. That's the network Itzan belonged to, even if it never sent a single soldier to either side. When a trade route serving one alliance broke or a harvest failed in territory loyal to the other, the shock didn't stay contained to the kingdom that caused it. It moved through the same channels the Tikal-Calakmul wars had used for more than a century. There's a detail that supports this model directly. Not every Maya region went dark at the same time. Cities in the north, like Chichen Itza, kept growing for generations after Tikal fell silent. Geography helps explain why. Tikal, Calakmul, and Dos Pilas all sat in the southern lowlands, a region with no permanent rivers, entirely dependent on seasonal rain collecting in shallow reservoirs. The northern Yucatan sits on porous limestone, riddled with cenotes, natural sinkholes that expose the water table directly. A city built next to a cenote wasn't just having a lucky run of good weather. It was drawing on a completely different water system than the one under strain across the south. If the whole civilization had simply run out of water, geography like that shouldn't matter. If the damage traveled along specific trade and political connections instead, cities sitting outside those connections, or on a different water system entirely, would come through fine. Some did. There's a name for why a system built this way has so little room to absorb a shock, and it comes from outside Maya studies entirely. In 1988, the anthropologist Joseph Tainter published a theory of societal collapse built on a simple economic idea: diminishing marginal returns. Tainter's argument is that complex societies grow by solving problems, and each solution adds a layer of complexity on top of the last, whether that means a new tier of administrators, a bigger standing army, or grander architecture, built to legitimize whoever is running things. Early problems are cheap to solve and pay off quickly. Every additional layer after that costs more to maintain than the one before it, while solving smaller problems. Eventually, a society is spending enormous resources just to stand still, and when a shock hits a system in that condition, whether it's a drought, a war, or a bad harvest, there's no slack left to absorb it. Tainter used the classic Maya as one of his central case studies. His other major example was the Western Roman Empire, a society that kept adding legions, provincial bureaucrats, and debased currency to solve each new crisis, until the cost of maintaining the empire outran what its economy could support. The specific mechanism was different. The shape of the failure was the same: a government too expensive to keep running. Hit by stress, it no longer had the reserves to absorb. By the 8th century, Maya kingdoms were maintaining exactly this kind of top-heavy structure. Temple complexes that grew larger every generation, a warrior aristocracy that had to keep winning wars, like the one Dos Pilas, got dragged into just to justify its own upkeep, and a religious system built on the promise that rulers could guarantee the rain. None of that comes cheap, and none of it grows more food. Put Tainter's framework next to Gwyneth's sediment cores, and the two ideas line up. The Itzan data shows the trigger wasn't uniform. It hit wherever drought actually struck. Tainter's framework explains why almost nowhere in the Maya world had the spare capacity left to survive whatever hit its neighbors. Warfare and political rivalry weren't limited to Tikal, Calakmul, and Dos Pilas. Across the southwestern lowlands, archaeologist Arthur Demarest has documented a similar pattern at smaller scale. New fortification walls at sites like Aguateca, and stone carvings naming captured rival kings as trophies. Demarest argues that this kind of elite status competition pulled resources away from the farming systems that fed everyone beneath the ruling class. Population added its own pressure on top of the politics. Tikal's roughly 120,000 residents, near its peak, were already pushing the region's farmland close to its limits, and cities across the lowlands were carrying comparable densities. A system with that little spare capacity, run by elites already spending heavily on status and warfare, doesn't have much left over for the day a trade route breaks or a harvest fails. In the worst hit regions, something close to 9 out of 10 people were gone within a few generations, a scale of loss that doesn't usually come from one bad stretch of weather. There's also a legitimacy problem underneath all of this. Roughly 90% of the Maya population worked as farmers, supporting a much smaller ruling class whose authority rested partly on the claim that its kings could keep the rain coming. In places where the drought was real, that claim collapsed along with the harvests. Some historians read the archaeological record at certain sites as signs of internal uprising, farmers and lower nobles turning on a ruling class that had stopped delivering on its half of the bargain. A system already spending heavily on temples and warfare doesn't just run out of food when that happens. It runs out of the story that justified who got to eat first. None of this means the Maya people vanished, and that's where the story gets complicated in a different direction. In 2025, a team led by geneticist Shigeki Nakagome at Trinity College Dublin sequenced the genomes of 7 people buried at Copan, a Maya city in what's now western Honduras, including both elite and sacrificial burials. The results, published in the journal Current Biology, show a clear demographic bottleneck around the time of the collapse. The population shrank sharply, but it never broke its genetic thread to the people who lived there before, or to Maya communities living in the same region today. In Nakagome's own words, the population decreased but did not become entirely extinct. What ended at Copan and at Tikal and at Itzan was a political and economic system. The costly complexity Tainter described. The people who survived it didn't disappear. Many stayed in the region. Some moved north towards cities like Chichen Itza that were still growing, and their descendants are traceable in Maya-speaking communities across Mexico and Central America today. The Copan genomes also showed something else worth mentioning. During the city's rise, people with ancestry from highland Mexico appear in the local population, tied to the dynasty's founding. Copan's first ruler, a man remembered as Kinich Yax Kukmo, established the royal line in 426 or 427 CE, and the genetic record shows outside ancestry entering the ruling class for generations afterward. The same connections that eventually helped spread the classic collapse, the marriages, the trade, the political debts, had been moving people, not just goods and armies, for centuries before it happened. What Laguna Itzan actually proves is narrower than it sounds, and more useful because of that. A city can keep its rain, keep its harvests, and still go down, because the thing that failed wasn't the climate. It was everything the climate was plugged into. The trade routes a prince like Balad Chan Kawil was born to defend. The alliances Tikal and Calakmul spent a century and a half fighting over. And the costly, top-heavy system, Tainter says, almost never leaves itself room to fail safely. The people didn't vanish. The system did. And the system had been running on borrowed time since long before the rain had anything to do with it. Laguna Itzan just happened to be the place with a lakebed patient, enough to keep the receipts.